Welcome to this afternoon's presentation of what's new in FirstClass 16. I'm Greg Kalust. I'm the president and founder of Canon Communications. We're the, most of you know, we're the longest running FirstClass partner in the world at this point, I think. We've been doing it since March of 1995, which seems like a very long time ago. And we're continuing to be specialists in FirstClass and keeping track of what's going on and what's coming up. So what I want to talk to you about today is what's new in FirstClass 16, and also I'll give you a look at some things that there's a service pack that's imminent, should be out fairly soon. I think I'd say by the end of January we'll be seeing a service pack 16.1, and in addition to some bug fixes and improvements, it also has a couple of new features in there that I'll be giving you a bit of a look at today. What I have to show you for the 16.1 is beta server, beta internet services, and beta web services. So everything might not work exactly the way that it will when it's finally released, but I do want to give you a quick peek at some of these things. So let's get started. So I've put together a keynote presentation, not because I like Keynote or PowerPoint, but because sometimes I lose track, and it will help you follow along a little bit. As I've said, I think you might have all heard this. I am recording this, and I will be posting the recording as soon as it's ready. Probably sometime later today or perhaps first thing tomorrow morning. So what's new in FirstClass? First of all, I want to talk about what's not new in FirstClass 16, because the FirstClass that you've all been using for a number of years remains the same at the core of the product. So everything that you're used to using is still there, still works. In some cases, things work better. So in terms of what you have to do to get you people in your organization ready for 16.1 in terms of training, support, and whatnot, the answer is not very much, because things are the same. There is a new FirstClass 16 client for the Mac that we'll have to talk about in a little bit. So if I don't remember to talk to you about that, please somebody remind me before we get done. But the client that people already have on their machines will continue to work, and everything that they already know how to do will continue to work. And it continues to be the case that FirstClass does lots of things that everybody doesn't know how to do, and that's probably not ever going to change. It's a very rich product. There's a lot in it. So the things that you're used to, email, contacts, conferences, calendars, and so on, those things are all still there, and then some in a few cases. It's also still the case that everything is in one app or window, and what I mean by that is FirstClass has all those things in it: email, contacts, conferences, file sharing, calendars, and so on, all in one application, whether it's in your web browser with the FirstClass web services, whether it's the desktop client, FirstClass Go on iOS or Android, or any of your devices. It's one application. You don't have to use multiple applications in order to get your work done. In other words, you don't need a file uploading client. You don't need a different calendar application, and so on and so forth. You can do all of your work in one place. One thing that's better about FirstClass 16 and 16.1 is the reality is you have other calendars, you have other contacts, you have other systems at your disposal, and FirstClass plays much more nicely with all of those other systems now, and in particular in 16.1, there's some things in there that are good news. If you're staying with FirstClass or upgrading to FirstClass 16, as opposed to going with some other system, then you'll see that there's no training or data migration is needed, so it remains a cost-effective solution going forward. Many of the features that you're used to are improved. I'll name some, but I'm not going to have time to demonstrate all of them, and some of them I don't use on a regular basis, so it's hard for me to demonstrate them anyway. But a couple I will give you a good look at. And again, as a reminder, there's a question answer, there's a question section on your GoToWebinar toolbar, and if you have a question, go ahead and ask it. I'll answer it pretty much as soon as I see it. Don't worry about interrupting the smooth flow of my presentation, because I don't really have one. I'm just kind of going along here. And I will check it periodically. So some of the new things that are in there is that received email addresses are automatically added to your contacts unless you ask them not to be. This was put in there because some other mail systems have that feature that if you get an email from somebody you never heard of before, they'll automatically be added into your contacts, which might or might not make any sense. But it's there now. It's controllable by a preference. Don't ask me to show you where that preference is right now because I can't. I don't remember. But it does seem to work pretty well. Something else that's new that's been asked for a long time that brings FirstClass closer to being also a project management system, so that it's another implement in the Swiss Army knife that FirstClass is assignable tasks. And in version 16, tasks are assignable in the FirstClass client by using the calendar. That's also the case in FirstClass Web Services. In 16.1 in FirstClass Web Services, we'll see that there also is a container which you can use to hold assigned tasks, so that if you've got a staff working for you, or you're working on a number of projects, you can track those projects in a window rather than trying to keep track of them all in a calendar. Something else that's new in 16 is that you can email to a FirstClass user group. In other words, you don't have to constantly, as an administrator, maintain mail lists for all staff or all administrators or all teachers or whatever the case might be. That if there's a user group named for any other reason, if you have a FirstClass user group, you can mail to that user group much more easily. It has to be set up by the administrator, but the administrator can then assign who can use that capability of emailing to groups. Google Calendar overlay made its first appearance in FirstClass 12.1. It's improved a little bit in 12.2, which is really what version 16 is. So FirstClass 16, for those of you who are confused about the sudden jump about what happened to 13, 14, and 15, is OpenText decided this summer that they would rebrand all of their products to the year 2016, including FirstClass. So FirstClass 16 has been released. It was released, I think, in June, but in reality, it's FirstClass 12.2. Those of you who are 12.0, 12.1, FirstClass 16 is really 12.2, but going forward, it's going to be 16 and 16.1 and so forth. So anyway, the version 16 includes a Google Calendar overlay using a new technology that's called external integration services. So if you want to subscribe your calendar or a group calendar in FirstClass to a Google Calendar, many of you are working in organizations that make use of Google as well. So if you want to have your Google Calendar show up in your FirstClass calendar in the same way that another FirstClass punch-through calendar would work, you can do that using external EIS or external integration services that's part of FCWS. And when we install FCWS on our hosted systems, that's included as part of the deal. In version 16, it's one direction only, so that you can see what's in your Google Calendar. In 16.1, assuming they can get it to work correctly, you'll be able to create an event in a FirstClass calendar and have that event show up in a Google Calendar. This has just been released to beta. It doesn't have 100% work yet, but I'll be able to give you a sense anyway of how that's going to work. when we get to the live demo part. And something else that's in there is the ability using CalDAV. There's a protocol called CalDAV so that we can synchronize your FirstClass calendar with your iCal calendar. And it probably works with other calendars also, but I mostly use a Mac, so I won't have time to look at it with the Mac calendar. That doesn't use the EIS. It actually goes in through the FirstClass Internet Services, and that's been working for a while, and it seems to work actually quite well. I can keep my two calendars synchronized quite nicely, and the iCal will even allow you to take a look at calendars that are punched through in your FirstClass calendar. Somebody asked me yesterday whether this will also support iCloud calendars, so calendars that you've got stored in Apple's iCloud, and the answer to that is I don't know yet. I tried to figure it out without success, and I've asked the developers up at OpenText for a response on that, but I didn't do that until this morning, because it hadn't occurred to me that that was a thing. So there are many features that are improved, and there are also some upcoming new features that I'll talk to you about. The most dramatic of these is in the FirstClass web interface, which makes it possible for people to use FirstClass without having to install a client, which comes in handy for people who have a device like a sure, that one, like a Chromebook. There we go. I know I could get it out. So if you have a Chromebook which doesn't let you install applications on it, being able to have access to FirstClass is enabled through the FirstClass web services. We call it FCWS, and that's improved greatly, and even more so in version 16.1. So I can say with pretty good confidence that it uses virtually all of the FirstClass features that you're used to using in the FirstClass client. It's not clear yet whether it's going to support FirstClass application services, what we used to call RAD, but it does support mail rules and conference rules and custom forms. So if it doesn't support the RAD applications, I'm not frankly too sure why, but I'll be finding out. That question came up yesterday with one of our school districts that uses a lot of FCAS applications for various processing, and they're curious about whether that will now work with FCWS. And so I've asked that question, and I'll give you a quick look at my blog later on. That's much more active than it used to be, and I'll be answering questions there as time goes on when I learn things. There are some new social features in the FirstClass web services, one of which I'll take a minute to show you in a little bit, that I'm kind of, I think excited is too strong a word, but I'm interested in. They've built in peer-to-peer video chat into the FirstClass web services, so that you can do a one-to-one video chat with someone else who is logged in to your FirstClass with web services. And it seems like that works pretty well with most browsers now. And when it first became available, it didn't, but it seems like it works pretty well with most browsers. And there are some file sharing improvements in terms of how you can share files with other people in your organizations, how you can lock files when they're out, how you can open files with WebDAV and edit them live and save them back into FirstClass, which makes it possible for people to work together more collaboratively than they could before. So that's a discussion of, but not a showing yet, of the new web interface. I'll get around to showing you that in a minute. But before I do, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask at this point, or anything specifically that you'd like to see? Again, you can type it in the question area off on the GoToWebinar menu, and I should be able to see it. If something seems like it's a very important question, I unmuted somebody yesterday to talk, and I can do that if it seems like a question that everybody ought to hear. I'm going to count to 5, and if there's nothing else in the showing up in the questions, then I'll go on to the next slide. But I will come back and take a look at that periodically. So I want to show you the video chat, but I knew, for one thing, it wasn't going to work right if I tried to do it live. So what I did yesterday was I recorded a video chat with Denise, our office manager. Many of you have had communications with Denise over the years, but I think virtually none of you have ever met her. So I thought it would be handy for her to help us take a look at this video chat. So I did a quick recording, and I found out listening to the recording last night that her voice didn't make it all the way to the recording. So I don't know whether I can hear it when I play it during the webinar here, but it didn't make it to the recording. I don't know whether that means that you can hear it or not. So we'll see. Well, so apparently the audio didn't come through, which would explain why it didn't come through in the on the recording that I did yesterday. But I can guarantee you that Denise had nice things to say about all of you. So so there's that. So that video chat is not available in the FirstClass client. It only works in the FirstClass web interface. It's run between the two web browsers, so it doesn't use your bandwidth, it doesn't use the server bandwidth, and it doesn't use the too much of your internal bandwidth on your networks, because it's pretty small. It's just and the technology is actually built into the web browser, and so it may be that not all web browsers support it, but most do. So one thing I can see about the question section over here is that I did actually answer that question, but I'm not seeing my answer. So I don't know whether that's the way it works or that's just how it goes. So let's move on to the next slide, and I want to talk about CalDAV, and I want to talk about this by showing it to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump out of the presentation here. I'm going to jump out of the keynote, and I'm going to go over and give us a quick tour of the FirstClass Web Services interface, so that you can see a little bit more of what I'm talking about. And while there, I'll talk more specifically about bidirectional calendar syncing. So bear with me for a second here, and with any luck, this will all work. So just as a caveat, I'm logging into my own account on firstclass.com. No, I'm not, on canoncom.com. And so what you're seeing is my desktop. And so it's conceivable that there are things that are on there that might be confusing, but there shouldn't be anything that's too disturbing. So I'm just going to use this as a platform for a quick tour. Some of you, I think, have not seen this interface, so I just want to make sure that everybody has seen it. If you have seen it before, there may be a couple of things that are different, so it might be worth sticking around, or this might be a good time to get a drink of water. So I'm. Well, that's interesting. Oli is sitting in on the webinar and has also sent me an email. I'm not too sure whether it's an appropriate time for me to open it now, Oli, but I will take a look at your message as soon as I get done. So just a quick tour here, or I'll peek at it on one of my devices that I'm sitting next to here. Maybe that'll be a good idea. So just a quick tour here. Across the top, there's a branding where it says OpenText FirstClass. That's rebrandable by you. So you can replace OpenText FirstClass with your logo, with your color scheme, and whatever seems appropriate to you to make this adequately meaningful to the community. That's not trivial, but it's not that hard to do either, and we can help you with it if you need it. Then the section in the middle where it says Canon Communications, for those of you who are first-class administrators, that comes out of your site name on your first-class server. Okay, so I did take a look at Oli's message. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Oli, but I did take a look at Oli's message, and he says that on where they're watching from, he and his team are watching from, they don't have the chat function. But take a look and see if you see something that says questions, Oli, because that's there. On my window, I have a chat which is not enabled and a questions which is. So what I've been referring to is the questions, not the chat function. So if it's not there, I'm logged in to my FirstClass on one of my devices that's sitting next to me here. So you can send me an email with any questions that might pop up there, and it's a little bit more cumbersome, but I'll get to it. Okay, so having said that, let's get back to our tour. There's a little thing underneath your site name that will tell your users how much disk space they have on your server. If you have established disk space quotas, it will show them how much disk space quota they have, how much of it's used, and that will let them do some math to see how much is left. And if you hover your cursor over the name, it'll tell you what version of your FirstClass server and web services you happen to run. One thing I want to point out about these disk space here, just as an aside, is that in our Canon hosting, we have plenty of disk space available, so that folks who are hosted with us, unless you specifically want to enforce it for your own policy reasons, we don't apply disk space quotas. We don't care. We want your folks to be able to get their work done, whatever it might happen to be. And I don't want somebody to be unable to work because they've hit an arbitrary wall in the middle of the night. So we don't impose disk space quotas. It's not the same as we won't enforce them if you do, but we won't make you enforce disk space quotas, because unlike what it was 15 years ago, disk space is pretty inexpensive. So there's what's there. What's over on the right-hand side here is a link to your profile. So there's your profile picture will be there. That's a picture of me standing at Mount Everest Base Camp. If you don't know that, I went to Mount Everest last year to raise awareness and funds for a disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy that one of my grandsons has. Let me know and I'll tell you the whole story at some point, but I won't belabor it now. You can see my name and a mini blog. If I click on my name, it'll take me to things like my blog, which I discovered yesterday is not displaying correctly. This should be displaying in a list, but it doesn't seem to be. So I'm not too sure why that is. So I'll attempt to fix that at some point. I have access to my profile where I can say things that I want the general public in my community. When I say general public, this is not a public system. It's just people who have accounts on my own server. And I'm showing this to you because the social features of FirstClass web services, I think, can help to make your organizations, your communities, much tighter than they might be otherwise. People can learn things about each other. They can see each other, and so on. So so that's the reason I wanted to show you that. And there is a little microblog here, which will show up not only here on your page, but it will also show up as a posting in the listings of whoever is following you on your FirstClass server. Will see that you've just updated your status. So you can think of that as a place to do an internal tweet or a quick status update. It's a microblog. Then coming back to where things are, there are three columns here on the FirstClass web services. The left-hand column is your personal information. It contains your mailbox, and it will display the 15 most recent messages in your mailbox that you have not read yet. If you click on it, it will display your entire mailbox. So I'm going to avoid that for the time being, unless somebody has a question and wants to see what the mailbox looks like. It looks like a mailbox. There's a calendar here, which includes your personal calendar and links to any other calendars, and gives you a quick display of what's entered in the calendars that you have access to, whether they're your FirstClass calendar or somebody else's FirstClass calendar or a group calendar that you have access to. And down below that is a workspace. So if you start an email and you don't send it, you'll find it in the drafts folder. Your contacts are accessible here. Your personal file storage and documents, and if you're using FirstClass voice services, versions FirstClass 16 web services gives you access to your voice greetings through this interface, as well as through the FirstClass client, and we also have access to your trash can or deleted items in here. The middle section here consists of conferences, folders, calendars, and so on that you see in your FirstClass desktop with the FirstClass client, with a little bit of a different organizational structure. The middle section here is an alphabetical listing of all of the things that are on your desktop, with the exception of things that you've decided that you want to keep track of, so you can move them yourself up to this upper level, which is referred to as your favorite places, and this is manageable by you, and you can pull things back down out of it. The middle section is always alphabetized. The upper section is organized according to how you want it to be. The bottom section is what we call external apps, and I'm not going to spend any time in there today because I discovered that most of those don't currently work, because when I upgraded, I didn't reconfigure them. So between now and the next time we meet, I will reconfigure those, so I hope that those will actually work. But what they're for is to make it possible for administrators of your FirstClass system to link your FirstClass to other external applications and then distribute that access to people in your organization by permission. So the one thing I do have that maybe will help you a little bit is I do have an application here for Google Drive. And this lets me log into my Google account and gives me read-only or download-only access to my Google Drive. It doesn't let me edit documents and whatnot that are in my Google Drive, but it does give me that. If I remember my password, it does. Gives me access to any files that might be stored there, and so on. If I've got a Google app that's a spreadsheet, I can see it, but I can't edit it, and that's a Google limitation. It's not a FirstClass limitation. There's version 16.1 of FirstClass, though, does support OAuth, and so it's theoretically possible for us to make that bi-directional, but as far as I know, nobody's done it yet. So anyway, so that's what that lower section is. The right-hand column is what I refer to as the social column, and this will show you my people, which is people that you've chosen to follow. So in a larger organization, people that you're following, you can see whether they're online. You can invite them to a quick chat, and so on and so forth. The pulse, I'm just going to click on very briefly here. because I've got mine munged up a little bit. I attempted to get it to be an RSS feed from my Facebook page without success. So it's kind of it's not too attractive. But what is supposed to be in here, among other things, is the status updates of everybody on your system that you have permission to see. That's that little status update in the upper right-hand corner here. Then there's a chat function, and the chat allows you to do things I don't think any of the people that I would chat with are online, but here's Denise. So what I did was I selected Denise to do that video chat, and you'll see that there's a button here that's got Initiate Video Chat on it. I can attach a file if I want to. There's a difference between this chat and the FirstClass client instant messaging or chat, which is that this persists. So in other words, I can send Denise or someone a quick message in the chat, and it will be there the next time she logs in, whereas the FirstClass client instant messaging or chatting is live only. It is the case in 16.1 that they've done a pretty good job of connecting the web services chat with the client chat, as long as you're using an updated FirstClass client. So there's the chats, and we also have an update section here, which is where if you're following a discussion in a conference, you would get a notification that something might have changed. If you're invited to join a new conference or community, that invitation would show up here in the update section. So I'm going to do a quick questions check, and I'm still not seeing any new questions. So if it's the case that you don't have any questions, I'll go on to some of the other things that I wanted to talk about. But I did want to pause to let you have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have now. And again, it's in the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel. And I know that some of you can see it because I see some questions in there, but no new ones. Okay, so if there aren't any new questions, then I want to talk about a couple of the newer features that I had mentioned. And one of them is I'm going to go to the calendar, and I'm opening up. This is my personal calendar on my FirstClass account, and I have set it so that I can add a Google Calendar to it. So if I choose Show Google Calendar, that's going to go and log into my Google account with any luck. And things that are in my Google Calendar will now show up in a few seconds here, overlaid on top of, there we go, on top of my FirstClass calendar. So there's some interoperability here, and it looks like there's going to be even more interoperability coming up, as if I go here and create a new calendar event, and set that up here in my FirstClass calendar. With any luck, by the time I get up and log into my Google account, something is going to be there in the Google Calendar. And I say with any luck because it doesn't always work. There it is. Okay, so this is still in a beta, and you might have noted that I put a title into the event when I created in FirstClass, but what shows up in Google is simply something called New Event, where it doesn't include that title. But if I change it here, and put something in the description field and save it, in theory, that information shows up back in the FirstClass account. So it's not thoroughly bidirectional in this beta yet, but it sure looks like they're going in that right direction. And you can see that this event that shows in my FirstClass calendar now has the title that I entered in up in Google Land, and the notes didn't come through. Well, that's helpful. Okay, so it's somewhat editable, just so that you have the idea. It should be the case also, though, that if I look at my Mac calendar, that some of the things that I've entered in the directly in the FirstClass calendar have showed up in the Mac calendar. Let's see if I refresh this, whether that new one will show up as well. Yes. So something that I created in the FirstClass calendar and edited in the Google Calendar is now showing up in my Mac calendar. So interoperability has come a long way in the last little while. So those of you who are wishing that FirstClass played better with others, I think you can start to feel pretty good about that. See if there's any questions about that one. Okay, so Oli, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but I do see your question in the question area here. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce your whole name in public the first time, but I think I could do it. But you know, just to make you feel better, my official last name is Donovan Kalust, and if you can spell that one, you're doing better than I am. That's why I go by Kalust. So there's that calendar thing. One other thing that I want to show you, we've got about 20 minutes left, so one other thing that I want to show you is a new container type in FTWS 16.1 that I think is going to prove to be really useful in many organizations, including my own, which is it's a container that's been built specifically to manage assigned tasks. So I'm going to open up this assigned task container, and you can see that there's some tasks that have been created here. It's very easy to do. You click on a button, and I can give the task a description. No, we're not going to upgrade a server. We're going to upgrade a server. There we go. I can assign it to someone on my staff. And I can give it a start date. One strange thing about the programming here is that the start date requires a slider to change or set the time, which I don't quite understand, but I'm not their programmers either, so who knows. So we're going to start it on the 7th. We can set a due date in the same way. And so on. If the person to whom it's been started, to whom it's been assigned, goes to the assigned thing and says in progress, that will enter the started on date, I think. We'll have a completed date, and we can attach files to it. It's got a text editor attached to it, just like a message. And then when we're done, we can publish it, and we can see at a glance all the different tasks that we've got going. So it becomes a pretty good basic project management tool. It's possibly not the best project management tool that you've ever seen, but it's the best one that you've ever seen in the same place as your email and your files and your calendar and everything else is. So FirstClass continues to improve the product, and I continue to be excited about it, and I hope you are too. So that's the test tasks. And let's see, no, there don't appear to be any new questions, but I'm going to pause here briefly with 18 minutes to go. I'm going to pause here briefly and ask if it's the case that you really don't have any questions. Anything at all, don't be shy. Well, okay, then I'm going to go back to my presentation for a few minutes just to make sure that I cover all of those things. And then I'm going to guess we'll have about 5 minutes toward the end where if you really do have questions, you can ask me. So we talked about CalDAV and the calendar syncing, and I think it actually works better today than it did yesterday, and not because anything's been upgraded. I think just because the stars are aligned better or something. Okay, so there are some questions coming in. Okay. So how difficult is it to upgrade to the new environment? So in terms of, Oli, I think you're with a school district in Massachusetts, and we host your system, and the upgrade for your system is on the list of things to be upgraded, I hope, over this winter holiday. In terms of your people using it, there's only two real caveats. One is that some of the new features, especially the FCWS that I was just showing you, will require some training. People have been using the FirstClass client for a while, sometimes have difficulty moving over to FCWS. The actual upgrading of the server is a piece of cake. There are installers for everything, and when we upgrade the core server, there's usually maybe 3 minutes of downtime while we replace the executables and then fire it back up again. So because I said 3 minutes, the tech guys are yelling at me, so figure 15. But that's pretty easy, and then everything else, the internet services, the web services, and so on, also have an installer. You click a button, it installs it. The downtime is limited to a few minutes for each one of those services. And then the use of it, the distribution of the new clients. There's new FirstClass 16 clients, and we'll be setting those up for our hosted customers to distribute them as necessary, and we can even set that up with an automatic one. There's one caveat that I said that I would mention earlier, which is that FirstClass rebuilt the desktop client for Macs to version 16, and because Apple changed the way they make system calls, the FirstClass 16 client will not run on. Oh, that's not true. Older clients. I'm going to back up here a second. I apologize for this. Older FirstClass clients will not run on the latest Mac OS Sierra. They will not run. You start them up and they crash immediately. So the FirstClass 16 client, which has been released, for anybody that's upgraded to Sierra or will upgrade to Sierra, you want to make sure that if you're using a FirstClass client, that you install the version 16 client. If you're a sub-admin or admin on your system, however, don't do that until your server has been upgraded to version 16. You'll have to use an older client to administer an older server. There are forms and buttons and other things that aren't in the same places and don't do the same things if you're an admin. Regular people, not a problem. Admins always, and this has always been the case, always use a client that matches the server version. So if you're an admin on a system that we host and we haven't upgraded it yet, continue to use the older client until we've upgraded the server. Then you can start to use the 16 client. So if that's not clear to everybody, somebody said, just send me an email and I'll send you back details on that if I didn't say it right. I'm seeing another question here, which I've been getting a lot lately, so I actually have a good answer for this, which is when will the hosted customers, we host a lot of FirstClass servers in our data centers, and the hosted customers, we're hoping to start the upgrade process for everybody during this holiday weekend. We discovered a little bit too late that one of the, we've been running our servers quite successfully on a Windows operating system that the folks who were testing version 16 didn't test on, so it's not officially supported. So in order to get officially supported in case something goes wrong, it works fine. The Canoncom server that has been running version 16 for months now, and it works fine, but they didn't test it up in Canada. So until we can get them to test it, we're going to have to upgrade the OS, which means that we have to create the environment first and then move it in. So when we're going to do it is as soon as possible, hopefully specifically for schools, the winter holiday is the best time for us to do things. And because we're having to set up a new OS in a new virtual machine, the downtime is going to be a little bit longer than simply upgrading in place, but not too much longer. So Jeff, if you send me an email, I'll check with the tech guys, and we'll coordinate a date for when your server can be upgraded, and it will be within the next couple of 3 weeks, if at all possible. You know, if there's something, if you don't want the downtime, or the tech guys tell me that there's a specific issue about your system, which would surprise me, and would surprise me about any of you, but who knows, then I hope to get to that within the next couple of 3 weeks if you want us to. So I hope that answered your question, Jeff. But one way or the other, send me an email, and I'll get back to you with more details on that. So Ole has another question here, which is, can the older clients be used with the newer version of the server environment? And the answer to that is yes. But when we upgrade your server to version 16, if you're doing admin work on that server, then in the case of Salem, Ole, I think, you know, there actually are two servers there. The Salem schools and the Salem town are on different servers, and they probably have a different upgrade schedule. The Salem town is on a server that we manage for the virtual towns and schools, and it's up to them to decide with you when that gets upgraded. But the older clients will work unless you're doing admin stuff, and we'll make sure that you're clear on that before we turn you loose to do any admin stuff on an updated server. Okay, so the questions are working. That's good. Okay, so I'll keep my eye on the questions while clicking through in the interest of time here. We've got 10 more minutes. In the interest of time, I'm going to click through some of the rest of the slides, but I've got the questions window open as well. So part of the 16.1 release is that there are new mobile clients. The iOS client that's been there for a long time, and I think it's just called FirstClass on iOS. Let me see. It was FirstClass Mobile, I guess, was the original one. And they ran into a problem with that when they upgraded to version 12, and people complained that it didn't work right anymore. And the folks at FirstClass said, well, yeah, we know that. We're not continuing to develop that, but so many people, including me, use it all the time. So they have put that back on the development schedule. So the iOS client, the older one, is improved. It works great, but it doesn't have all the features in it. So for all of the new features, there's an application called Go that runs on iOS, Android, and Windows Mobile. It's identical on each platform, and it's identical. The interface is identical to the FirstClass Web Services interface, not the client interface, not the desktop client interface. It's identical with the Web Services interface. And in 16.1, anything you can do with a web browser on a desktop computer or a laptop, you'll be able to do on a mobile device using FirstClass Go. So, and I've got a quick list here that feel free to try to read. I've mentioned some of these things. That this comes from the roadmap, the FirstClass product roadmap for coming months. There's about to be a new roadmap released, and as soon as that's released, I'll post it on canoncom.com on our website. And most of the things that are on this list that is in tiny, I'm sure, tiny script on your screen, I talked about today. So I'm going to skip past that one. Those of you who don't have your FirstClass server hosted by Canon, you might want to consider that. I think actually most of you do, but you might want to consider that. I think the folks who are on here who are hosted by Canon are at least pretty pleased with it. So I think we got some good references here online with us today. So anyway, so there are some benefits: 24/7 management. You can retain full admin rights, the minimum downtime for a move, and I think everybody will agree with this one. There's a reduced total cost of ownership because you don't have to upgrade operating systems and hardware and so on, and you don't have to have full-time 24/7 staff because we do. So the total cost of ownership of your first class should drop considerably. Now, some people are continuing to drift off from, especially in schools, are continuing to drift off to Google Apps for Education and more now toward Microsoft 365. And we know that sometimes is out of your control as the tech folks at your organization. We know that sometimes that's out of your control, or even sometimes that it's you that wants to go. If you do go, please do me a favor. Let us know as early as you can, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is that's for our infrastructure planning reasons, and the other is that we've had experience of people in an organization saying, we have to stop using FirstClass, we have to go to Google, and if I'm told about that early enough, I've actually been able to sit down with folks and say, you know, FirstClass can do such and such and such and such that you might not have known about, so people have ended up staying after all. So just give us some early notice. If you do have to go, we can help you migrate mailboxes to Gmail and to 365 and to a couple of other mail server types. So you don't have to leave your mail behind if you go. So let us know and we can talk about that. Something that if you actually read the email that I sent out announcing these webinars, you'll have seen that we've partnered up with a company that's called iNet Communications, and we can now, working with them, offer fiber connectivity for internet access to your schools or your businesses, including if your school, these things are E-rate eligible. As far as I can tell, redundant internet isn't E-rate eligible, but it certainly makes a lot of sense if you can have two completely distinct pipes. That way, if one pipe goes down, you can still stay online. We can offer hosted voice over IP, something that's called SIP trunking, which is telephone lines over IP. And we can offer that frequently for less money than you're paying for it if you already have SIP trunking, or if you're using a PRI for a copper phone system. We can almost always offer you lower pricing on that. Something that came up yesterday is because of all of this, we can now offer you the FirstClass unified messaging services attached to your phone system, whether you're on-premise or you're in our hosted environment. We have several organizations now using the FirstClass unified communications, or what FirstClass now calls voice services, connecting your phone system to your FirstClass system. We can do that now for you too. I'm going to get back to the questions in a second. Daniel, I appreciate that free isn't always free. Boy, isn't that the truth? So the last thing I want to talk to you about today is that we've just launched. We've gone live with our new Canaan website. It was built entirely in FirstClass. It runs on our FirstClass server. It's built using a product called FirstMagic. There are three very good systems for using FirstClass as a web publishing platform. We decided to give FirstMagic a try. We also support RWD and virtual towns and schools, but we decided to give FirstMagic a try. One of the advantages that I found with it is that although it does everything that fancy web servers can do, unlike other things that publish websites on FirstClass, you don't have to use the FirstClass client to publish your website. You can do the whole thing with a web browser. And so I've been maintaining our website for the last 2 or 3 weeks just with a web browser. I'm still learning how to do it, and I'm still putting content in there. But among other things, if you go to canancom.com anytime after we're done and click on the blog, you'll get to see the nice blog interface that's there, but you'll also see that I've used the blog to post a link to our YouTube channel that has the video of yesterday's webinar, and when I get to it, we'll have the video of today's webinar. That, I think, is everything that I have to say. Yep, that's everything that I thought I was going to say. So I will pay attention to some questions here. So Daniel wants to know if there are updates to FC Sync services. The calendar syncing to Android devices are wonky. That's a good point. FirstClass Go isn't always an option because calendar reminders don't pop up on the device. They do on mine, but maybe that's because I'm using the syncing. Let me look into that. I just got my first Android. I'm half sorry to say, and I haven't played with it very much yet. And the tech guys are too busy keeping the servers running for me to ask them to do this stuff. So let me check the sync services. Daniel, send me an email, and because I'll forget otherwise. Send me an email, and I'll get back to everybody with how well the sync services is working now. There have been several versions released since the last time I updated ours, so I haven't tested the very latest ones, and there is a new one that'll be out. There was a new one for 16, and there'll be a new one out for 16.1. Let me check and see whether they're any better, Daniel, and I'll get back to you on that. But as I say, if you don't send me an email, there's a good chance I'll forget it by the time I'm finished hanging up because I'm old. Okay, so what else do we have for questions here? It's just about 4 o'clock, which is when I said I'd end. But I don't have anything important on my calendar for the next half an hour or so. So anybody that wants to stay around and ask me questions is more than welcome to. But for everybody that's going to run away, I want to say thank you for your attendance and your attention. I appreciate having the opportunity to share all this stuff with you. As you can tell, I'm still excited about FirstClass and the future of FirstClass, and I appreciate that you are too, and that your organizations are continuing to use it. Please feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions about FirstClass or any issues with your FirstClass or with our hosting or any of those things. I'm more than happy to go out of my way to resolve whatever your issues are, to answer any of your questions. And again, I thank you for being here. I think what I will do though is I will turn off the recording, but I will stick around and answer any questions that anybody might have lingering. Or if you think up something later on, send me an email and I'll get back to everybody with that. So thank you. Have a good rest of your day and enjoy the holiday season, and keep in touch. Thanks.